Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads. We continue with Misery 6. This is the written part of Misery's Return. Misery's Return by Paul Sheldon for Annie Wilkes, Chapter 1. For a moment, Jeffrey Alberton was not sure who the old man at the door was, and this was not entirely because the bell had awakened him from a deepening doze. The irritating thing about village life, he saw, was that there weren't enough people for there to be any perfect strangers. Instead, there were just enough to keep one from knowing immediately who many of the villagers were. Sometimes all one really had to go on was a family resemblance, and such resemblances, of course, never precluded the unlikely but hardly impossible coincidence of bastardy. One could usually handle such moments, no matter how much one might feel was entering one's dotage while trying to maintain an ordinary conversation with a person whose name should be able to recall but could not. Things only reached the more cosmic realms of embarrassment when two such familiar faces arrived at the same time, and one felt called upon to make introductions. "I hope I'll not be disturbing ye, sir," the visitor said. He was twisting a cheap cloth cap resentfully in his hand, and in the light cast by the lamp Jeffrey held up, his face looked lined and yelled and terribly worried, frightened even. It's just that I didn't want to go to Dr. Booking's, nor did I want to disturb his lordship. Not at least until I spoke to you, if you take my meaning, sir. Jeffrey didn't, but quite suddenly he did know one thing, who this late-coming visitor was. The mention of Dr. Bookings, the C of E minister, had done it. 3 days ago, Dr. Bookings had performed Misery's last rites in the churchyard which lay behind the rectory, and this fellow had been there, lurking considerably in the background where he was less apt to be noticed. His name was Coulter. He was one of the church sextons. To be brutally frank, the main man was a gravedigger. "Coulter," he said, "what can I do for you?" Coulter spoke hesitantly. "It's the noises, sir. The noises in the churchyard. Her ladyship rests not easy, sir, so she doesn't, and I'm afeard I'd..." Jeffrey felt as if someone had punched him in the midsection. He pulled in the gasp of air, and the hot pain needled his side, where his ribs had been tightly taped by Dr. Shinebone. Shinebone's gloomy assessment had been that Jeffrey would almost certainly take pneumonia after lying in the ditch all night in the chilly rain. But 3 days had passed, and there had not been no onset of fever and coughing. He knew there would not be. God did not lay off the guilty so easily. He believed that God would let him live to perpetuate his poor lost darling's memory for a long, long time. "Are you all right, sir?" Coulter asked. "I heard you were terrible bunged up the other night." He paused. "The night herself died." "I'm fine," Jeffrey said slowly. "Coulter, these sounds you hear, you know they are just imaginings, don't you?" Coulter looked shocked. "Imaginings," he said. "Sure. Next you'll be telling me you have no belief in Jesus and that the life everlasting. Why didn't Duncan Fromsley see old man Patterson not 2 days after his funeral, glowing just as white as marsh fire, which is what probably was," Jeffrey thought. Marsh fire plus whatever came out of Fromsley's last battle. And ain't half the bleeding town seen that old Baptist monk that walks the basement of Ridge Heath Manor. They even set down a couple of stairs from the bleeding London. Psyching sincerity to look inner that uni. Jeffrey knew that ladies Coulter meant a couple of hysterical belldowns, probably suffering the ultimate calms in Monsoon's midlife bow that Dottie as a child draw it and name it puzzle. "Ghosts are just as real you or me, sir," Coulter was saying earnestly. "I don't mind the idea of them, but these noises are fearsome, spooky. So they are, and I hardly ever even like to go near the churchyard. And I like to dig a grave for the roid man babe as I do." Jeffrey said an inward prayer of patience. The urge to be low at this poor sexton was almost insurmountable. He had been dozing peacefully enough in front of his own fire with a book in his lap when Coulter came, waking him up, and he was coming more and more awake all the time. And every second, the dull sorrow settled more deeply over him, the awareness that his darling was gone. She was 3 days in her grave, soon to be a week, a month, a year, 10 years. The sorrow, he thought, was like a rock on the shoreline of the ocean. When one was sleeping as if the tide was in, and there was some grief, sleep was like a tide which covered the rock of grief. When one woke over, the tide began to go out, and soon the rock was visible again. A barnacle-encrusted thing, inaugural reality, a thing which would be there forever, or until God chose to wash it away. This fool dared to come here and prate of ghosts. But this man's face looked so wretched that Geoffrey was able to control himself. Miss Misery, her ladyship, was much loved, Geoffrey said quietly. Yes, sir, so she was, Coulter agreed fearfully. He switched the custody of his cloth cap to his left hand solely, and with his right produced a giant red handkerchief from his pockets. He honked mightily into it, his eyes watering. All of us sorrow at her passing. Geoffrey's hands went to his shirt and rubbed the heavy muslin wrappings beneath it restlessly. So we do, sir, so we do. Coulter's words were muffled by the handkerchief, but Geoffrey could see his eyes. The man was really honestly weeping. The last of his own selfish anger dissolved in pity. She were a good lady, sir. Aye, she were a great lady, and it would be a terrible thing the way his lordship took about it. Aye, she was fine, Geoffrey said gently, and found to his dismay that his own tears were now closed, like cloudburst which threatens on a summer afternoon. And sometimes, Coulter, when someone especially fine passes away, someone especially dear to us all, we find it hard to not let that someone go. So we may imagine they are not gone. Do you follow me? Aye, sir, Coulter said eagerly. But these sounds, sir, if you heard them. Patiently, Geoffrey said, what sort of sounds do you mean? He thought Coulter would speak of sounds which might be no more than the wind of the trees, sound amplified by his own imagination. Of course, a badger bumbling its way down to Little Dunthorpe Stream, which lay behind the churchyard. And so far, hardly prepared when Coulter whispered in an affrighted voice, scratching sounds, sir. It sounds like as if she were alive down there, trying to work her way back to the land of the living, so it does. Chapter 2. 15 minutes later, alone again, Geoffrey approached the dining board sideboard. He was reeling from side to side like a man negotiating the foredeck of a ship in a gale. He felt like a man in a gale. You might have believed that the fewer Dr. Shinebone had almost gleefully predicted had come to him at last, and with vengeance. But it wasn't fever which had silently brought wild roses. His cheeks turned to his forehead the color of candle wax, not fever which made his hands shake so badly they almost dropped the decanter of brandy as he brought it out of the sideboard. If there was a chance, the slightest chance, that the monstrous idea Coulter had planted in his mind was true, he had no business pausing here at all. But he felt that without a drink he might soon be swooning to the floor. Geoffrey Aliburton did something that he had never ever done in his whole life, something he never did again. He lifted the decanter directly to his mouth and drank from the neck. Then he stepped back and whispered, we shall see about this. We shall see about this, by heaven. And if I go to this insane errand only to discover nothing at the end of an old gravedigger's imagination after all, I will have the good man Coulter's earlobes on my watch chain, no matter how much he loved misery. And I'm going to stop right there. Thanks for listening.